We're here at the Epstein press conference where police have just descended on protesters, forcing them off to the sidewalk after Thomas Massie, Ro Khanna, and Marjorie Taylor Greene gave their final remarks following the testimony of the Epstein victim.
Brave, courageous women fighting this fight. This is a fight for women and children and any person that is facing sexual abuse and rape and captivity and human trafficking right now.
We're the men on the Republican side of the aisle. They need to step up and just basically tell the White House, look, you're wrong.
Could you please give us your name?
Giuffre Epstein.
Since his supposed suicide in 2019, billionaire financier and child sex trafficker Giuffre Epstein has become an infamously household name in American politics. Increasing pressure has mounted from the public and now from select members of the United States government to reveal Epstein's connections in their entirety, who he had interpersonal relationships with, who visited his estates where he carried out his sexual abuse, who his well-connected friends in the shadows were. Among the politicians taking the initiative to force the disclosure of all Epstein-related documents are a handful of Republicans spearheaded by Representative Thomas Massie, as well as a lion's share of congressional Democrats. In early September, they held a press conference on Capitol Hill where many Epstein victims testified for the first time, which we will cover in this video. And their most recent and arguably most consequential victory has been the successful release of the Epstein birthday book. The birthday book illuminates us to the character of Epstein and his allies in a way nothing had previously been able to. The House Oversight Committee subpoenaed the document from his estate, per the request of Epstein victims' lawyers, and released the scrapbook with personalized letters from countless powerful individuals that clearly detail the rise of Epstein and extent of his network. The book was compiled by his romantic interest and trafficker-in-chief Ghislaine Maxwell, now convicted of sex trafficking, for which she had solicited pictures and notes from a myriad of Epstein's friends and colleagues. The book visually details Epstein's rise to power. In the early pages, we see old pictures of him in his boyish youth, with notes from old anonymous friends, not special in any particular way. However, we are immediately illuminated to certain sexual prurience that consumed Epstein. One of the preliminary notes revolves around a beach day him and his friends had, in which the author talks about how Epstein and his friends, quote, jokingly held some girls at knife point and demanded they undress themselves. The book is littered with explicit photos and lewd drawings, as pictured here, in which Epstein is being massaged by multiple women next to a drawing of him with little girls. The scrapbook also has countless pictures of animals mating, largely unexplained. We see pictures of him from the start of his professional career as a physics teacher, as well as pictures of him in his early financier days, such as this one with Leslie Wexner, his catapult into wealth. Epstein was first taken under the wing of famous financier Alan Greenberg, who taught him the trade and eventually introduced him to Leslie Wexner, the founder of Bath & Body Works and presider over Victoria's Secret, who entrusted Epstein with power of attorney over his financial apparatus and introduced him to his most famous clientele and future connections. We see letters from famous academics, lawyers like Alan Dershowitz, who represented O.J. Simpson and eventually Epstein, who in this letter writes to Epstein to explain how he managed to convince a magazine to take negative reporting surrounding his abuses out of the spotlight as a birthday present. Another connection materialized in the scrapbook is President Donald Trump, specifically through the inclusion of a letter with a lewd drawing of a woman penned by Trump, which he had denied the authenticity of months before in the wake of a Wall Street Journal leak. There is nothing special about Epstein outside of his sexually deviant proclivities. Many Harvard physicists who he often dined with considered him a pseudo-intellectual. His success as a financier was more rooted in opportune connection than raw talent, and his upbringing was uneventful. However, he fostered a safe climate for sexual abuse that attracted the most powerful. He accentuated their darkest desires and made safe not only the expression of them as seen in his scrapbook, but the impulsive acting on them. The comedian Noel Miller once crassly asked, "At what level of net worth do you start wanting to sexually abuse children?" When looking to the connections of Epstein, we see a certain sheltered prurience residing in the men which orbited him. Epstein had a desire to, quote, seed the human race, unquote. A desire for unparalleled wealth is rooted in some sort of libidinal drive that mirrors the forces of prurience which plague Epstein's rich connections. Dershowitz, present in the scrapbook, was notorious for running naked to be perceived on the beaches of Martha's Vineyard. Elon Musk, mentioned in connection to Epstein and photographed with Maxwell, is known to have an obsession with breeding, not unlike that of Epstein's. Trump has been caught making many offhanded remarks about young women, as well as statements about his successes imposing himself on them through his sheer status.
I don't even know. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything.
Limitless desire shapes the drive for wealth as it does for sexual conquest. Epstein was nothing but a facilitator of desire fulfillment. Once in his network, there was a sense of security, a shared interest in self-preservation. But not everyone shielding for those connected to Epstein were themselves connected to him. So who are the co-conspirators? Those who never interacted with him, never even met him, that are doing the bidding of those involved, and what are their motives? To understand this, we have to look no further than the incumbent Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson.
Police then called me in for questioning. I had told them the truth despite the fact that I was a teenager and a minor, and I was able
The
to
Epstein victim press conference was not arbitrarily held on September 3rd. It was arranged to be on that date by Representative Thomas Massie because it was the first morning the House was back in session. Victims shook as they recollected the abuse inflicted on them by Epstein and his accomplices, and demanded a release of the entirety of the Epstein Files possessed by the Department of Justice.
The American people are watching, and history is watching. Which side will you be on? Thank you.
Many protesters encircled the press line, with signs depicting Trump's connection to Epstein and demanding a full file release. In between victim testimonies, Congressman Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna delivered remarks, as well as Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Thomas Massie, a representative out of Northern Kentucky in the school of Ron Paul, has been attempting to force a discharge petition to force a vote on a bill that would release the contents of the Epstein Files.
Now, the Speaker of the House just offered a fig leaf to my colleagues. They're going to vote on a non-binding resolution today that does absolutely nothing. They're allowing the DOJ to curate all of the information that the DOJ is giving them. If you've looked at the pages they've released so far, they're heavily redacted. Some pages are entirely redacted. So I'm calling on my colleagues, be one of the next two who sponsors this discharge petition.
In short, he's attempting to bypass a congressional stall which has kept a vote on the files at bay, and actually force congressmen to vote on the Epstein file release, instead of letting them sit inactively and get away with telling their constituents that they haven't had the opportunity to vote for a release yet.
There's political fallout if they don't vote for an Epstein resolution. So what Mike Johnson is doing is giving them a non-binding, meaningless resolution to vote on so they can go back home and say, I don't know what you're complaining about. I didn't support Massie's, but I supported the Speaker's resolution.
The first stage of the Epstein Files release, arbitrated by the Department of Justice, effectively redacted any useful information, all the while refusing to release thousands of other documents that some DOJ officials have been caught saying would implicate Republicans and their donors in sex trafficking crimes.
Yeah, thousands and thousands of pages of files. They'll redact every Republican or conservative person in those files, leave all the liberal Democratic people in those files.
I think they visited that Maxwell person.
Yeah.
And also involved.
Got transferred to a minimum security prison too recently, which is against BOP policy because she's a convicted sex offender. They're offering her something to keep it on show.
Massie is the sole male Republican vote in favor of the discharge petition, which needs 218 votes to pass and actually force a vote on the House floor for the release of the files. As of filming, Massie has 217 signatures, one shy of forcing a vote with the 218th secured. A vote would be disastrous for the Republicans in Congress because they would be forced to put their name and record to either a vote in favor of the release, which would be viewed as a betrayal of Trump, or a vote against the release, a betrayal of their constituents. On the grounds of the Capitol were hints of intimidation from the Trump camp. At one point, during a victim's testimony, a fighter jet did 2 laps over the Capitol, effectively muffling out the voice of the victim as she delivered her remarks. At the beginning of the conference, one protester was almost immediately arrested for disturbance after yelling at Marjorie Taylor Greene and Pam Bondi, who briefly stopped by Capitol Hill.
I'm sorry. I know her. He didn't know the rules. Robbie.
Massie is no stranger to Trump's intimidation. He has had many run-ins with Trump, ranging from budget bills to continuing resolutions to military strikes on Iran. He is the subject of a near-weekly attack from Trump on Truth Social, and has been threatened with being primaried countless times. After the press conference, we got an opportunity to ask Massie a few questions, and his answers illuminated us to a much bigger political obstacle than Donald Trump, one he encounters every day and shares a House floor with.
We're the men on the Republican side of the aisle. They need to step up and just basically tell the White House, look, I support your ideology at the White House, but on this issue, you're wrong. 80% of the base, 80% of the people who elected Donald Trump want these files released, and the other 20% aren't paying attention to the issue. So it's the right thing policy-wise, and it's the right thing political.
Are you personally worried at all by the White House's threats against you or Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene? Or
no, I'm the threat that's already happened. I mean, they're already running $2 million of ads against me.
What happened to Thomas Massie? President Trump is banning sex changes on minors. Massie voted against it. President Trump is cutting taxes and saving Kentucky families $10,000. Massie voted against it. President Trump is securing our border and deporting criminal aliens. Massie voted against Trump again. And after Trump obliterated Iran's nuclear weapons program, Massie sided with Democrats and the Ayatollah. Let's fire Thomas Massie. MAGA Kentucky is responsible for the content of this advertising.
3 billionaires, 2 hedge fund managers. One of them is in Epstein's black book.
Who are these billionaires?
John Paulson is one of them. Paul Singer is another, and Miriam Adelson is the other. But the one who's in Epstein's black book is John Paulson.
What conversations have you had?
And by the way, those are max donors to the
Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 119th Congress.
Every single obstacle and congressional dead end interrupting the release of the Epstein Files has been personally crafted and designed by the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. In July, Speaker Johnson sent the House an early recess to ensure that Massie had no opportunity to force a vote on the Epstein Files. In early September, he introduced his own non-binding measure, empty of any substance, to afford congressmen a vote for some resolution instead of Massie's discharge petition, specifically so that they didn't have to answer to their constituents for not supporting Massie's file release attempt. Massie was the only Republican in Congress to vote against Johnson's reappointment to Speaker earlier this year at the onset of Trump's second term. Currently, Speaker Johnson is delaying the swearing in of a newly elected congressional Democrat out of Arizona who had promised to be Massie's 218th vote on the discharge petition, originally citing the government shutdown, aiming to bring Congress back in session by Tuesday the 7th, but reversing course and extending the recess until mid-October as of October 3rd.
Pursuant to Clause 13 of Rule 1, the House stands adjourned until 3:30 p.m. on Friday, October 3rd at 2025.
When you are sworn in, do you intend to sign the discharge petition that would force a vote on the release of the Epstein Files?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So I would be 218. And that seems to, I mean, at first I was trying not to be a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah,
I'm like, okay,
I also have been the same. Like, maybe there's something I'm missing here.
Right. It doesn't have anything to do with these files, but that is literally the only thing I can point to. It's not like me getting sworn in is going to change, now the Democrats will be in the majority. I mean, there are certain things that are not going to change, where Democrats will still be in the minority. That is literally the only thing that is different.
No one does Trump's bidding like Mike Johnson, and in order to understand why, we first have to understand how Mike Johnson became the Speaker of the House. In 2022, Republicans had regained control of the House in the midterm elections. At the beginning of the 118th Congress, the Republicans couldn't get behind one person for the role of Speaker, and Representative Kevin McCarthy, who was originally slated to win as an extension of an internal roll call vote following the November election, failed to gain the necessary votes to be elected Speaker. This was because of the Republican Freedom Caucus, a group of 45 populist MAGA congressional Republicans like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene who refused to support McCarthy, as they feared he would be weak in his opposition to Biden. Eventually they acquiesced and joined the ranks in voting for him, but McCarthy had to make a variety of concessions, including the induction of a rule that would allow any single member of the House to introduce a measure to remove the Speaker. Not even a year later, after McCarthy had spearheaded a Republican effort to pass a bipartisan Biden-approved funding bill to avert a government shutdown, Matt Gaetz introduced a motion to vacate the speakership. Democrats, taking the opportunity to make Republicans look directionally incompetent without any coherent leadership, ended up joining forces with the Republican Freedom Caucus to oust McCarthy.
Unfortunately, 4% of our conference can join all the Democrats and dictate who can be the Republican Speaker in this House. I don't think that rule is good for the institution, but apparently I'm the only one. I believe I can continue to fight, maybe in a different manner. I will not run for Speaker again. I'll have the conference pick somebody else.
After being vacated from the speakership, he eventually resigned, and the House went weeks without a speaker as they frantically searched for someone who would fight Biden on every congressional detail. Eventually, Mike Johnson of Louisiana was anointed as speaker, under a clear condition that he remains loyal to the MAGA ideology that gave him the opportunity. And since 2023, he has done exactly that. This year alone, he has defended Trump's deployment of the National Guard and called for the tarring and feathering of Gavin Newsom.
That's not my lane. I'm not going to give you legal analysis on whether Gavin Newsom should be arrested, but he ought to be tarred and feathered, I'll say that. I mean, look, he's standing in the way of the administration and the carrying out of federal law.
Led the effort to pass the big beautiful bill. Sent the House into recess multiple times to prevent the release of the Epstein Files, defended Trump's strike on Iran without congressional approval, and defended the White House and Senate's refusal to negotiate with Democrats over the budget, which eventually culminated in government shutdown. Speaker Johnson has weaponized every rule and technicality against Massie in his effort to release the Epstein Files. But Massie has been relentless, and time seems to be working against the Speaker. Eventually, Congress will have to return to its session. Johnson will have to swear the newly elected Congresswoman into office, and with Massie's numbers adding up to 218, the House will have to vote on the release of the Epstein Files. And every single vote will be preceded with a name that will have to answer to their district, a name that will have to explain themselves to their president, a name that will have to defend themselves to their donors. And that exactly is Massie's aim.
For everyone watching at home, I think it's important to put yourself in these women's shoes. As you're questioning, why can't they just name the names? What you don't realize is they just told their stories of being raped and being abused, being victimized, being manipulated, being coerced, and basically held in a prison of captivity of sexual abuse while they were young teenagers and extremely young, vulnerable women. And in Jeffrey Epstein's home and the places they went with him, they saw the most powerful people in the world in his pictures, and they saw him with those people. Can you imagine how terrifying it would be to name names like that? These are some of the richest, most powerful people in the world that could sue these women into poverty and homelessness.
Have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said
I named one today.
I said we are not being practiced.
Dressed in blue and yellow, wonder why I felt so much in love with her.
So well
Daisy lady.
Okay.
I thought I had no choice. If I disobeyed him, I knew something bad would happen. So knowing I did not want to be stuck with
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
Pretty flowers.
Meet with anyone who has no.
Oh, I'd never sting her. You know I'd love to bring her honey sweet.
Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents
Daisy lady
on the day of
wonder
my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files?
I don't know what day that was. So